From here to Cape Horn is 1,250 miles due west, and to the Cape of Good Hope, 3,200 miles east-northeast. The temperate waters of the South Atlantic have already given place to the subantarctic waters of the Southern Ocean. South Georgia is the island. This is Undine South Harbor.
I came ashore here 15 years ago and 2 weeks from HMS Owen to take possession of what was in effect my patch. I wanted to buy it. The Crown wasn't having any, so I'd leased it. 1.5 square miles. From the saddleback of ice on the ridge there, this side down to the sea, the other side down to the sea, and this side again down into the cove.
To all to whom these presents shall come, greetings. Whereas Duncan Carse, hereinafter called the lessee, has made application for a lease of a parcel of land being Duclow Head. We of our special grace do by these presents for us, our heirs and successors, lease unto the said lessee all that lot and parcel of land, provided that this lease is granted subject to the reservations, conditions and restrictions as are set forth hereafter. A, we will not be responsible for the welfare or logistic support and transport of the lessee. B, the right to hunt, kill, and take seal is reserved to us, our heirs and successors. Provided also that this lease is granted for a period of 10 years, and that a rent of 1 shilling shall be paid by the lessee yearly.
I landed down in the cove there on Little Beach. I had a hut, food and clothing, tents and sledges, fuel, furniture, instruments, 3 dinghies, the lot, about 11 tons. It was my intent to live alone here incommunicado for not less than 18 months.
You'd be surprised how difficult people seem to find it to understand that. And not only that, I gave a press conference before I took off. I don't think it helped much, because the truth was largely unacceptable. Mr. Carse, are you a solitary? Yes. Do you like people? No. Are you running away? No. I've got a job to do, a very full and balanced program of common sense research. What are you trying to prove? Nothing. You taking radio? No. What happens if you fall ill or have an accident? I have to cope. Mr. Carse, Dick Barton, sir. Why? Because I want to. And one off-the-record question with only 2 of us to hear it. Had I been crossed in love? That made my day. This is the only sheltered cove on 150 miles of coastline. That was my first reason for choosing it. Once you're inside the outer rocks, it's like a mill pond almost always. I pitched first camp up here in the gully on the 22nd of February 1961. I built my hut down on the flat in the tussock back of Little Beach. It was 18 feet by 12 with a 6-foot square porch and 8 feet high. These stills, incidentally, were taken with a 10-second delay and shipped out in a naval post bag. I called my hut Amo House, A-M-O-W, all my own work. And I moved in on March the 25th. It all went like a bomb until HMS Owen came back on April the 5th to see how I was getting on. And suddenly there were people everywhere wanting to help. No need for me to be careful. So I fell and buggered my left ankle. A bad sprain, nothing broken. But it put me to a very difficult decision. HMS Owen was on our way home. If I went aboard and so back to a whaling station, I couldn't get back in. If I hung on in Undine South Harbor, I might not be able to cope. I stayed, but I was a long-term cripple. I fixed the shelving in Amo House. I installed Geller gas and set about knocking the furniture together. Outside, I organized things for the winter so that I'd never have to go more than a few yards. Evenings, I rested up and listened to the surf on the outer rocks. At first, I didn't like it. But when, after 3 months, no wave had ever broken on Little Beach, I'd learned to live with it. By mid-May, I was blissfully happy.
I was dreaming about bears, a mother and her cub. We were walking hand in paw. And the mother suddenly rounded on me, snarling and striking out, and I screamed myself awake.
That's wrong. I don't remember getting out. I do remember standing here and then looking at what was left of Limbo House and then out to sea. And the outer rocks were like black keyholes in a wall of white water. And the cove was a maelstrom of breakers standing straight up and exploding in all directions. As I stood watching, the cove emptied. The sea drained back almost to the outer rocks, just as though someone had pulled out a plug. It was most peculiar. Then the cove filled up again, and I began to take stock. I was wearing a string vest, an army issue shirt, long johns. I was barefoot in 18 inches of slush and numb to the knee. And I said to myself, you must do something quickly, Carse, or you'll die, which was perfectly true. And there was nothing I could do except grub around in the debris of Limbo House. The wave had spent itself about midway across the flat. There was a clear-cut demarcation, green one side, white the other, 4 feet of snow there and limp tussock here. And I could see quite a few bits and pieces half submerged in the slush. Incidentally, the beach had disappeared completely. There was nothing there except the bedrock. And the focal point for salvage had to be what was left of the hut. I didn't expect to find anything. I didn't think I had a chance. It was 7 o'clock on the morning of May the 20th. And I gave myself 48 hours. Then something happened. I found my spare clothing dry, my spare sleeping bag dry. I found my pots and pans box, my 2 primuses and my spare matches dry. I found my #1 tent, the white one, undamaged, and that made 2. My #2 tent, the grey one, was still up in first camp because for 6 weeks I'd been too crippled to get up there. I found my 8 boxes of sledging rations intact. I found a case of 12 bottles of vintage Burgundy, a marlin spike to knock the tops off with, and an 8-pint saucepan so I could drink. And I was becoming uneasy. Here was I within a few hours of the wave, exactly equipped with a minimum of tools for indefinite survival. It was a straight package deal against all the odds. But it could be a bluff, a deception just to prolong the agony, and I wasn't buying that one. I had my drugs. I also had permission to use my drugs for an easy way out if need be. So I'd find my drugs just in case. Not there. My medical T-test might never have happened. And then I saw a small tin lying which could have come from a chemist's, and it had pills. I was looking for morphine to make a comfortable end. I found a tin of 500 ABCD vitamin tablets to keep me in good health. So something was happening. I couldn't, anyway, not immediately, face up to going on living at sea level. The only alternative to the flat was the gully. But I had to get up there with a sleeping bag and sledging rations and my pots and pans box. Tussockies, trouble at the best of times, and I was still a very lame duck. What saved me was the Burgundy. I was so drunk by early afternoon that nothing deterred, nothing daunted, nothing hurt. I could fall about and not feel a thing. It didn't matter. So I'd got up there with the gear and reoccupied first camp before dark.
I am afraid.
In one respect, I suppose I was ready. Ever since I knew the job was on, I'd been conditioning myself to face fear, but not grief. That took me completely by surprise. You see, I couldn't now do anything except survive, and it simply wasn't worth it. I wasn't worth it. And one thing that I couldn't understand was why nobody showed up from the whaling stations. I couldn't believe that the wave hadn't clobbered them too, and that as soon as they'd sorted themselves out, they'd be round to see what had happened to me. Of course, they never had the wave. They couldn't know. My second reason for choosing this particular cove had been its inaccessibility, which was now ironic. Nobody could get at me over land. Only the sealers knew how to get at me by sea, and they wouldn't now be around again before the spring, mid-September at the earliest. Call it 4 months, 120 days, which was the survival target I set myself. So 4 30-day stages, and I'd take a rain check every quarter day.
Primus, processed cheese over there. Socks. Batteries. Don't know what there is under here, but we might look. No. Just bits of hardboard. I think I was using that as sort of dunnage to lie on. Oh, and Primus prickers, plenty of those.
You know, not being in control of a situation gets me down almost quicker than anything, so I had to take charge. I gave myself priorities: to snug down in first camp for the duration if need be, to get a solid roof over my head, to give the sealers a chance to show up, to get myself out if they didn't. And I set myself disciplines, regular meals, a well-ordered tent because squalor gets me down just the same, and never to forego a survival discipline unless I were physically incapable.
The prevailing winds in Undine South Harbour are the westerlies. The danger wind is an easterly that cuts loose about once a month. Emu House would have stood up to them. I didn't think first camp could. On June the 4th, my first easterly since the wave, in effect, blasted me out of the gully and down to the flat.
My favorite tent is a tapered ridge design with a small arse end to pitch into the wind, shaped like a wedge. One of my tents will just about fit this wallow. And in 1961, from June the 6th until August the 9th, one of them did. When the winter snows came and the flat was covered to the height of the tussock, it was like living in a lidless white box with no room to turn around. This is Tussock Camp. And here's one of the tent guys. The sound of the surf was much louder down here, and I kept on imagining another wave. But I slept well enough once I could get off.
When there was hoarfrost in the tent, I didn't waste it. Hoarfrost makes good drinking water. When there was a thaw, when my body heat had puddled the ground sheet, I meticulously mopped up. After breakfast, after drying out socks and mitts over the primus, these were the first survival disciplines of the day. On a bad morning, they could take me till noon.
You still want to know? I still want to know. Your brother was an intelligent man. A practical man. And he knew how to look after himself. Yeah.
By mid-June, I was out of shock and badly in need of a constructive job, something positive. Just holding my own, which I was, didn't help morale any. So I settled for a solid roof over my head, anything not to have to agonize over the safety of the tent. I'd found a fairly dry little wallow flanked by a boulder, and I reckoned one of the busted dinghies would just about dig it in. But there wasn't going to be much headroom.
And now, seeing that I am within 10 hours of having lived my first 30 days, to take stock, I have put by more than enough of the necessaries of life to last me until the spring. I have my better tent pitched in what seems to be the most sheltered campsite I have yet found. I have my other tent in reserve for an emergency or a boat journey. I have made a start on building a permanent shelter. My physical condition is excellent, my morale so-so. It was June the 18th, my first quarter day.
This is all that's left of what I called the lodge. The boulder formed one wall, then I alternated packing cases with a tussock for the other and cemented it all with snow. And I took the dinghy and capsized it for a roof and lashed it down to a cordon of 5-gallon drums. There's the dinghy. Inside, I put down dunnage and wood wool and waterproof paper. And then I spread the frozen mattress from Amo House on top. I tried out the lodge on the night of July the 6th. It was cold, calm, clear, with the moon in her last quarter, very beautiful. And I couldn't take it. It wasn't the strangeness, the confinement, the pitchy dark. It was the silence and the not knowing. I'd soundproofed the lodge. I could hear nothing at all, not even the surf on the outer rocks. And I was Lazarus. You know how children invent magic rituals and then invest their non-observance with the most dire consequences. You tread on the crack in the paving stones and they'll open and swallow you up, that sort of thing. I dreamed up a whole hierarchy of superstitions when I was in South Harbour. Take the gentoo penguins. They've got a rookery up here. They used to come all the way to Little Beach to take the sea. Some, not all of them, God knows why. And I got to think about them, that my fate and their presence were interrelated. That so long as the gentoo penguins were around, and I had actually to be able to see them, I'd be all right. But if ever they took off, end of Carse. So when the day after I'd had to write off the lodge, I went for my beach walk, and I found the snow all the way from Little Beach to Long Beach, packed hard and flat by thousands and thousands of penguin prints. I was shaken to the core. The gentoos had done a night's flit and killed me. And so they had. Done a night's flit, all except a few who were enough to save me. The 6th and 7th of July were bad days, and they had to be the third misfortune. I saw Sweetie with his tail feathers frozen together and unable to fly. I tried to catch him for de-icing. I couldn't, and I never saw him again. That was sad. Now that the lodge was a write-off, I was beginning to think of getting myself out. I'd have to anyway, as the sealers didn't show up in the spring. Now, here's the cove, and there's Mount Paget. And 17 miles as the crow flies over the southwest shoulder, the nearest whaling station, Grytviken. 12 miles northwest of Grytviken, 3 more whaling stations, Leith Harbour, Husvik, and Stromness. Now, there are 2 major sledge routes in South Georgia, a southern and a northern. The southern one leaves you stranded on the Bath Point Peninsula or Dartmouth Point. So Grytviken was out. The northern one takes you to within 5 miles and 2 hours of Stromness, a simple walk through a low col. So Stromness was on. Now, I was here, and there's the sledge route. And from Dukelow Head to Holmestrand, along that stretch of coast, there is no place where I could strike inland with a chance. So it'd have to be Holmestrand, though I didn't much like the crevassing on the Esmark Glacier, and I was planning to join up with the sledge route here. It would still mean a hell of a long pull, 35 miles, and I'd be gambling on a day and a night of absolute perfection. No cloud, no wind, no swell, no ice, with a full moon to boot, and that was asking rather a lot. But it was the best bet, and I reckon I could do it. I tried out the 12-foot dinghy on the 15th of July, rode round Dukelow Head and back, and she was sound.
I'd been off colour for about a fortnight. Aches and pains, no appetite, lethargy, which I'd put down to indigestion. Then I realized it was something to do with my heart.
And quite unexpected disability. I should make it.
It was a shock that coincided with my second quarter day, July the 18th.
At first I wouldn't accept it, not Carse's heart, couldn't be. And then when I couldn't sleep on my left side, couldn't even lie on it, I had to, and spent a whole afternoon walking my beaches and trying to come to terms. Morale was back to square one.
But it doesn't hurt. You're not in pain.
Not really. I'd like to know what's wrong, though. Stress syndrome, Carse. Nothing organic. You've been too unhappy and too afraid for too long, that's all. Stress syndrome. So no panic. But I did panic. I slept badly on the night of July the 21st. Then I overslept, and I woke to a perfect day. Flat calm, like this, but no cloud in the sky. And on the spur of the moment, I decided to cut and run. I hadn't planned it. I wasn't ready, I wasn't fit, and it was mad. I got away about 12 noon. I was hoping for a quick job, 20 hours in the dinghy, a rest at Holmestrand, 20 hours on ski over the island. But there was so much gear in the dinghy, I had very little leg room for rowing, and probably about 6 inches freeboard. I pulled out of the cove, through the kelp streamers. When I got outside, I ran into a 3-foot lop, knocked me back a bit. Round Duclos Head, leaving the Pickersgills Islands to port. You wouldn't think it, but they're 10 miles off. And came up inside the Freyberg Rocks. And as I came up inside the Freyberg Rocks, I started meeting rivulets of brash ice and looking over my shoulder. There still wasn't a cloud in the sky, just that fog bank on a line with Annengoff Island, the big one, and the Pickersgills out on the horizon. By 2 o'clock, I was past Rocky Bay, coming up to that Shontorp Rock, like a little black bun there, feeling rather smug because I was making 2 knots, and that put Holmestrand within 15 hours. And I looked over my shoulder again, and the fog was on the move. And it was cotton wooling across Hauger Strait and rubbing out the flat bannocks of the Hauger Reef one by one. And I spun the dinghy on the next swell and set course for home. And then a most disconcerting thing happened. A leopard seal surfaced right astern, and they're big, aggressive buggers. And he practically laid his snake's head on the transom, stared me out, and then took to underrunning me, coming in left as I dipped the oars, going out right as I lifted them. And the oar blades were missing him by inches, and he could have capsized me with a touch. And he stayed with me all the way from Shontorp Rock, right the way back into the cove. I damn near wet myself. With hindsight, I'd say that was the first real mistake I made, and I was very lucky to get away with it. If you live at sea level in the sub-Antarctic, you're liable to trespass. South Georgia, it's elephant seals. They haul out to calve and mate in the spring and take over the beaches and move up into the tussock. Calves are no problem. You can see them off with snowballs. Cows turn tail at the prod of a ski stick. Bulls are a different matter altogether. They're in a different class. The largest bull whose statistics I can accept, because I know the man who took them, measured 23 feet, which would make him around 5 tons. Now, elephant seal bulls, once fornication time is over, like to find themselves a hidey hole in the tussock, which they turn into a wallow. It was probable Tussock Camp had been a wallow and would be again, so I'd have to go. And how soon, and where to?
I had only myself and my friend to ask.
So I've got to be off the flat by the beginning of September. There's nowhere to go but the gully and bugger the easterlies. It'll be a hard job. So I must make it easy, mustn't I, Fran? That means good snow cover and no falling about. So when to move? When would you move, my friend? You think before the spring thaw? You're right. I can't get around when the going's half and half. How soon, then? No, I do not want to share Tussock Camp with a bloody great bull, Fran. It's not my style. You should know that. So it's really get out when I can. That's about it. Is that what you'd advise? Sometimes, Fran, I wonder how real you are. How real I am to you.
I moved up here from the flat on August the 9th. I didn't want to. I'd be exposed to the easterlies again, but there was nowhere else. I checked the gully out first, using my number 2 tent, the grey one, as a wind and drift gauge, and it was fine. So I moved up and dug in on the site of first camp, only now I called it last camp. It was quite an excavation. The pit was as deep as the tussock was high,
So in theory, the wind should blow over the top. And then the spring blizzards came. It snowed the night of the 10th, all the following day and the following night, until there was such a weight of drift on the 10th that the ridge was down to sleeping bag level. I was propping it up with my knees. By the morning of the 13th, there was a 10-foot cornice overhanging the tent on the weather side, and I had to concede I couldn't keep last camp open. So I dug out Tussock Camp next day and reoccupied it on August the 15th. And it was the same thing all over again, only Tussock Camp was smaller and drifted up quicker, and I was having to pitch the snow way above my head. You see, the tussock's about head high. Now, if you can imagine it wholly snow-covered and then afoot, you'll see what I mean. And I went on blizzarding throughout the 16th and that night, throughout the 17th and that night, till I just about had it.
My morale is low.
Morale was low, my diary apprehensive. Another horrible night of tremendous drift and snowfall building up to a great weight on the tent. But I managed to prop it up until daylight. Then a heavy dig-out, then breakfast, now this. This was full blizzard on August the 18th, my third quarter day, and the moment of greatest hazard since the wave.
So there I was, digging out before breakfast around midday, at dusk in the small hours, and I couldn't keep Tussock Camp open either. On the evening of August the 18th, I went on to shift work, 2 hours on, 2 off. There was a moon somewhere behind all the shit, and so quite a bit of light when I turned to around 7. And I can remember the total misery of tackling something that I knew I wouldn't be able to go through with. Something that had got me beat before I began. So I sang at the top of my voice, "Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. Oh, what a beautiful feeling. Everything's going my way." And the wind dropped. The drift settled, it stopped snowing. I dug out in under the hour. I turned in, slept like a log. I rate those 10 days in mid-August my second real mistake. I was trying to hide, taking cover. And you know the fates don't like that kind of thing. So when I made my final move up from the flat, I opted for the wide open spaces, here again, but on, 10 feet of snow. I reckon I'd sooner be blown away than buried. On August the 24th, I damn near was.
I suspect it was blowing around 75 knots, with gusts nudging 100 and tearing the snow surface apart into a cannonade of airborne debris. And I sat on the doorstep to take what I could of the strain for 18 hours. It was the last easterly I had. This is my diary, part of it. I feel I might well end this notebook with a long-term view. A, I will wait for the sealers until the end of September. B, I will then take stock of all resources and check the seaworthiness or not of the dinghy. C, I will then concentrate on precise preparations for a boat journey and a land crossing by the modified Shackleton route. D, I will leave for King Haakon Bay when the moon is making during the second half of October, and I shall travel light. That was written on August the 31st, when I could count on the sealers showing up, if indeed they were going to, in 2-3 weeks' time, and I was planning to keep watch from Lookout Bluff throughout the hours of daylight as from September the 15th. It should have been easy. It wasn't, because I'd gone back quite a bit. Oh yes, I was a very, very unmanned man. I could have become hysterical. I didn't, largely because of the Fran stories. After the first one, I'd started talking to Fran, and she'd more or less taken over.
I now threw up a plot. She told me if it was true. We worked it out together and I wrote it down. By September, we were doing this pretty well every night, always last thing because it relaxed me enough to go to sleep.
So you made a pass at you. You weren't feeling like it. You gave him a fourpenny one. They flew out and he couldn't find them. You did. Kept them. Fran, how could you? Sunday coming up and a sermon to preach and no top set. He'd only made a pass at you. Same as I would. Yes, darling, I think it's funny. A bit rough. You bitch, Fran. You adorable bitch.
Your Fran. My Fran.
I can't be anybody else's.
Why?
I thought it was time. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't exist.
Disappointed?
No.
Pleased?
Yes.
Fran, darling, what do we do?
There's only one thing we can. But you'll have to take off those damn winter woolies.
September came in grey and penetratingly damp cold. My survival disciplines were now an intolerable effort of will. I could even forget them. And my emotional resilience was nil. When I was down, I stayed down, which was most of the time. And I was on edge to a degree. A shift of wind, a flick of fresh snow, and I was out of the tent and up to Lookout Bluff like a rocket to see what was cooking. Only Fran and her stories could ever relax me, and I was spending more and more time putting them on paper. Fran's story 13, the one about the curate's teeth, kept me busy for days.
How long are you going to make him do penance? He's done it. You give them back? Fran nodded.
Dear God, not another one, dear God, not another. Go and see, you silly shit. They're early.
Albatross ahoy! Ahoy!
No one on the bridge. Drinking coffee or got their heads down.
Albatross ahoy! Get the wax out of your bloody ears! Albatross! Albatross ahoy! Ahoy! It was the only time I lost control. Trying to get a grip on myself back in last camp, I boiled up some powder milk, lit my pipe, and finished off Fran's story 13. But how? You haven't seen him, only in church. I put them in the offertory bag.
They've come back. Bastards have come back.
As a matter of fact, it wasn't the Albatross. It was the other sealer, Petrel. And she only put in because my old friend, Captain Hauger, saw 4 bull elephant seals hauled out on Little Beach and decided to take them. It was September the 12th. I'd done 116 days, and I was very, very tired. This is a Bible. It was given me by my grandmother when I was 4. I lost sight of it some 30 years later, I suspect when I was divorced. I haven't read it, I have looked at the pictures. It showed up again the day I sailed from Devonport in HMS Owen. A brown paper parcel from my daughter Elizabeth, who thought I might like to have it. 8 months to the day after that, when I was grubbing around in this slum, I dredged it up and decided to keep it because I remembered the pictures and I liked them. It was the only book I did. And when the time came to leave Undine South Harbour, it was just this Bible, my diaries, the Fran's stories, and a bottle of scotch I'd been saving for the sealers that I took with me. I got very drunk that night. Before I turned in, you see, ever since I'd accepted that the package deal after the wave was extra chance, something had happened. I'd wanted confirmation, I'd wanted proof. And I thought, now's the time. If ever there's going to be a sign, it has to be now. So I laid this Bible on the bunk, and I closed my eyes, and I flipped it open, and the first words I looked at were the 7th verse of the 33rd Psalm. He gathereth the waters of the sea together as an heap. You could construe that as a sign, I suppose, or not. Either way, you'd never be sure. And that's not a bad thing. If we had all the answers, we'd lose our one dignity, our one grace. We wouldn't be able to stick our necks out anymore, make the act of faith. After all, where would I be without the enigma of Amor House? It was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Nothing again will ever come so near to destroy me, both in the flesh and as a man. It was equally the best. If I had to commit myself, I'd say the wave was fixed about the time I got my permissions and raised my funds. It became part of the plan. This is part of the plan. But I wonder whose. Amor House is my act of faith.